Hey, what's up guys? So in this video I want to talk about the Radenso RC M remote mount radar detector. This is a high-end custom installed detector and it's actually one of my favorite remotes that you can get. I currently have the NetRadar DSP and the Stinger VIP also installed, and of those three it's actually my favorite one. I've been using it as my daily driver as far as my remote for the past couple weeks or so, and I'm actually quite happy with it. I wouldn't say that I love the detector, but I would say that I like it. Overall it seems to be a very good, well-rounded unit. It does have a couple maybe issues and quirks and annoyances that I want to address as well, but overall I want to go over the detector and share kind of what I like about it and also what I don't like. In a nutshell, it offers good long-range performance. The BSM filtering is excellent. It's probably actually some of the best on the market. It in fact is able to filter out Hondas and Acuras, which I don't think any other manufacturer is able to do, so that's pretty impressive. If you're looking for good BSM filtering, check out the Radensos. It's got GPS lockouts, low-speed muting, red light camera alerts, so all the stuff that you'll need around town. It's mostly RDD immune, not completely, but mostly. It detects the MRCD and the MRCT, so for those of you who need low-powered radar detection, it does a really good job. In fact, it's actually the best of all the different custom installed detectors at detecting the MRCD. If you get the two antenna version, so front and rear radar detector heads, it will give you arrows to help you locate the source of the threat, which is very helpful in practice. It can integrate directly with the anti-laser priority, so if you want one integrated setup as far as the display and the controller for both the radar detector as well as the laser jammer, you can have both of them in one integrated setup, which is really nice. So the best laser jammer on the market paired with an excellent remote mount radar detector. Additionally, Radenso is doing a good job as far as listening to their customers and steadily improving the detector over time. In fact, just this morning I got a firmware update that fixes some of the most annoying things and issues that I've experienced with this detector. I shared it with Radenso and others have as well, and well, here we go. Here is a firmware update. This is a beta that we're testing, but yeah, it's actually looking really good so far, and some of the most annoying things that I experienced with this detector are now no longer an issue, which is great. There's still a couple other ones, but they're continuing to work on that too, and that's something that I really like as well. So a good detector that continues to get better over time. Now, this detector retails for $18.49 for the two antenna version, front and rear. It's currently only available here in the US. Unfortunately, it's not yet available in Canada, which kind of stinks because it does such a good job with the MRCD and whatnot, and I think it would be a great choice for Canadians as well, but there's kind of some initial issues as far as setting up distribution, so right now it's only available here in the US. Now, it's effectively the remote version of the Radenso Pro M. The Pro M is the windshield mount version. The RCM is going to be your custom installed version. There are a couple differences. They're based on the same platform and they share most all of the same features and whatnot, but there are a few differences. Other than price, the RCM is $18.49. The Pro M is $5.49. And besides the fact that the RCM is a remote as opposed to a windshield mount, you've got things like the fact that the antenna for the RCM, it's physically larger, and so the detector is able to do a better job of hearing radar at a distance, so it's just going to give you longer range. It's got better sensitivity. The Ka-band segmentation on the RCM gives you the ability to individually select which Ka-band frequency ranges you turn on and off. The Pro M basically just allows you to switch between Ka wide and Ka narrow. And then the RCM, because it's got the rear antenna available, it also gives you arrows, whereas the Pro M, there's no option for arrows because there's just one front-facing antenna. So there are a couple differences, but fundamentally it's it's based on the same platform. So one is the remote version and one is the windshield mount. So now that we have a good overview of the RCM, let's go into some more of the details. Starting off with the performance, the long-range performance. Basically, this detector is going to be a good long-range performer, but it is not the longest range detector on the market. I did some testing with a bunch of other remotes, and I found it actually performed towards the bottom of the pack relative to like the Stinger VIP, NetRadar DSP, Escort Max CI 360, etc. I found this to be true on 33.8 as well as on 34.7. In Canada, they tested it as well, and they also found that the RCM managed to get beaten by the R3 and the NetRadar DSP on 34.7 as well as on 35.5. However, the Texas Countermeasure Testing Group had a chance to test it, and they found that it was able to keep up with the Uniden R1 and R3, as well as the Escort Redline on 34.7. And it managed to beat the Radenso Pro M as well as the Valentine 1. And so results can vary, of course, from test to test and course to course and between different copies of the units. But overall, it looks to be a good long-range performer, but not the longest range detector on the market. Now, as far as the frequency display on the detector will always round your different frequencies. So if you pick up 34.7, it will always display 34.700. All K-band alerts will show up as 24.150. I wish it had the ability to give us exact frequency ranges on the detector, but it's currently not able to do that. I was actually talking with Radenso about this today, actually, and they were saying that they could do it, but it's kind of on the lower priority list for their engineers. They're wanting to work on some other things that are more important and affect more people. Personally, I would love the detector to have an accurate frequency display, but I actually agree with Radenso that maybe some of the other things that are more important and relevant to more people are things that they should tackle first. So I agree with their decision, but that doesn't change the fact that I do wish it had an accurate frequency display. As far as the false alerts on Ka band, I find that overall it does a very good job. I did have one experience a couple weeks ago when I was driving around and the detector started going off to Ka band, everything from 33.8 to 34.7 to 35.5. This could happen if the detector was overdriving, but that wasn't the case. I didn't find any police officers around. So I was driving around actually trying to find the arrows. I would turn onto different surface streets. I couldn't find where the officer was, and it looked just to be a false alert, especially the fact that it was changing frequencies on me like that. I was running with Ka filter set to normal. I've since switched it to Ka filter high. I haven't experienced that since, but I also only experienced that once on Ka normal. That wasn't a regular thing by any means, and so overall it does seem to do a good job as far as Ka falses, but it's not perfect. Now, when it comes to K-band filtering, I think this is probably one of the most impressive aspects of the detector, particularly the BSM filtering. Now, as I mentioned, it has the ability to filter out Hondas and Acuras. Nobody, myself included, has reported a single BSM false to a Honda or an Acura yet, which is pretty impressive. In fact, just the other day I was driving and I noticed there was a Honda up ahead, or an Acura, I forget which, and the RCM was quiet, and so I flipped on my Uniden R3. It started to false to the vehicle, whereas the Radenso was staying silent. Now, that's not to say that the Radenso is perfect and it's immune to BSM falses. I find that, again, in my experience, it tends to false more to GM vehicles. I've seen it false to a GMC SUV. I've also seen it false to a Cadillac CTS-V. Now, there's some other GM vehicles that I've seen the BSM light going off, and it's not falsing, but the ones where I have noticed it falsing seems to be primarily the GM vehicles. Nevertheless, whatever Radenso is doing as far as their BSM filter, the fact that they're able to filter out Hondas and Acuras is kind of amazing. No other manufacturer is able to do this yet, so if you're looking for the best BSM filter on the market, currently it looks like the top BSM filter is going to Radenso. Now, this is also true to their windshield mount version, the Radenso Pro M, so if you're looking for a good BSM filter, this is another option here. Now, moving on to GPS lockouts. The lockouts here are manual, so when you come across a stationary false alert, you just press and hold the GPS lockout button and the detector goes into a lockout learning process. Then as you're driving down the road, it learns the entire length of the GPS lockout and its location. Then when the signal goes away, it stops the learning process and boom, your GPS lockout is created. Now, Radenso used to have some issues with their GPS lockouts sticking, meaning you would lock out a signal, but then you would continue getting alerted later on down the line. Now it looks like they're very effective. It's been doing a great job for me as well as other people who are driving around with it. We're all reporting that the lockouts now stick, so it's now working really well. There's also an option that Radenso has implemented. It's kind of the one beep option, meaning where when it detects a locked out signal, it'll give you the option to either just give you a single beep and let you know that, hey, there's a K-band signal present, and then it just goes quiet, or you can have it be totally silent and not alert you at all. So you have the option of having the detector be totally quiet for a locked out signal or letting you know that a K-band signal is present, so maybe you'd want to pay a little bit more attention. That's really cool. Usually it's done one way or the other. This is the first time I've seen a manufacturer actually give us the option on how locked out signals present themselves. Now, I think the biggest annoyance that I have with lockouts right now is the fact that the mute button and the lockout button are different buttons. And so the reason this is kind of an issue is what happens when you start your car. Let's say you're in a shopping center, start up your car, there's a K-band signal right there, but your detector has not yet acquired a GPS lock. In that situation, your detector is not going to be able to lock out the signal properly, and if you go to try to lock out the signal, the detector will not stop alerting. It's going to keep alerting even though you're trying to quiet it down. What you need to do in that situation is actually go and press the mute button to the left of it to get it to quiet down, and then once the GPS signal comes back, then you can use the lockout button if it hasn't already been locked out in the past. So this is kind of annoying when I'm trying to quiet down the detector and it refuses to stop alerting. You see, most detectors, when you want to mute the detector, in order to lock out the signal, it's kind of some sort of extended press of the mute button. Maybe you press the mute button once to quiet it down, and then if you want to lock it out, it's a double press or a triple press or a long press. So kind of a super mute. It's like press it once to quiet it down and really press it if you want the signal to be like permanently locked out, right? I like the fact that they're being done on one button. However, with the Radensos, they're done on two separate buttons, and that can kind of be an issue if you don't yet have a GPS lock. And so kind of an annoyance that I found in shopping centers, but overall not a big deal. You can just learn to be like, oh, if it's a false, just press the mute button once and then move over and press the lockout button, and then it will lock the signal out. So you can kind of work around it, but it is something that I've noticed compared to other detectors. Now, I know some people are wondering about what about automatic GPS lockouts, so the detector can learn those false alerts itself. It's not able to do that because of patent and licensing restrictions. Radenso has the license for GPS lockouts, but the license limits them to doing them manually. Until that patent expires in a couple years, they're going to be doing manual lockouts, not automatic GPS lockouts, and that's actually why behind the scenes. Now, if you're driving in a new part of town and you haven't taught the detector yet where the GPS lockouts are, it also offers low-speed muting to keep the detector quiet. And yeah, it actually does a really good job. Now, one annoyance that, well, I guess one thing that I didn't really like is the fact that when it was muting a signal, it would mute it audibly and it would also hide it completely visually, so you would have no idea if the detector is detecting anything. There is now a change in the beta firmware that I downloaded this morning to where when it's detecting a signal, you're going to get low speed muting audibly, but it will visually show it on the display, which is excellent. So now you've got more information that something is going on around you, but the detector knows that it's a false, so it will keep it quiet. So thank you, Radenso, for implementing that feature. Next, let's take a look at arrows. Now, I'd like to actually update the section here on arrows. Since I originally shot this video, I've done a bunch more testing and experimentation and playing around with the detector to figure out exactly how the arrows work. I'm actually not a huge fan of the arrows here on this detector. I'm finding there's three issues primarily that kind of mess with the user experience and actually make it a little bit harder for me to determine where the signal is, even though the detector has arrows and it's pointing right towards it. Two of the issues have to do with the detector itself, and the third issue has to do with my installation in my car specifically. Now, the way the arrows work here is when you're driving down the road, if the signal is up ahead, the front antenna will pick it up and the front arrow will light up. When the signal is far away and it's weak, you'll have a very small arrow. Then as you start getting closer and closer to the source and the signal gets stronger, that arrow will start to get larger and larger. Eventually, the rear antenna is going to see the signal as well, and so the rear arrow will also light up, but it's going to be smaller than the front arrow. Then eventually, as you get closer to the source and eventually pass it, the front arrow will start to get smaller, and then eventually it goes away, and then you're left with just the rear arrow, and then eventually that goes away too. Now, something you'll notice here is that when you're detecting a signal, even one signal, you're going to be having both the front arrow and the rear arrow lighting up simultaneously. And the way you tell if the signal's ahead of you or behind is you compare the size of the arrows. If the front arrow is bigger, the signal's ahead. If the rear arrow is bigger, the signal is behind. Pretty straightforward, but a little bit less clear than a detector that actually just makes the determination for you and says, oh, hey, I can tell the signal is stronger ahead, I'll light up the front arrow. Oh, it's stronger behind, I'll light up the rear arrow. The Radenso RC M does not do that, and I really wish it would, because it would really simplify things. I don't want to have to be staring at the detector and watching, different changing size arrows when I'm trying to be focused on the road, The second thing that I've noticed has to do with the fact that many times, not always, but many times as I'm getting close to a source, the signal may actually drop momentarily. The arrow may actually go away. This is really common as I'm getting really close to a speed sign and just about to pass it. I'll notice sometimes the front arrow will disappear for a second or two and then it'll come back. Now, this again kind of adds to the confusion of like, if I'm focused on the road and I just want to glance over at the arrows to tell me where the signal is, if the maybe arrows are coming and going, this also makes it a little bit more confusing to just be able to instantly tell where the signal is, which is really what you want the arrows to do. Now, the third issue that I've noticed has to do with my installation here in my car. You see, I don't have a ton of good places to install a rear antenna in my car, and I actually have it installed kind of in the trunk area of my vehicle. Now, unfortunately, in that area, it is behind metal, and I also have metallic paint, both of which will block the radar signal and thus reduce the sensitivity and the signal strength for the rear antenna. And I actually see this in practice. Like, for example, if I'm driving towards a speed sign that's pointed the opposite direction, it's clocking traffic moving in the other direction, As I'm driving towards it, and you can see the speed sign here on the left-hand side, when I pass the sign, the rear antenna will light up, but it never actually lights up with a strong rear arrow, even though the detector is shooting me right in the back. It should light up with a really strong signal behind, but it doesn't actually do that. This is due to the fact that, well, my car itself is physically blocking a lot of the signal from reaching the rear antenna, and so it kind of messes with the arrows. There's actually two effects that this has. One is the fact that I never see a strong rear signal, so it kind of messes with the arrows in general. The second thing is it also reduces the overall range to the rear because, well, a lot of the signal is being blocked. I don't actually really care about not having huge range from behind. For the front antenna, yeah, definitely that's really important, but not so much for the rear. But it does mess with the antennas, and it makes it a little bit harder to for me to tell where the signal is. I can kind of work it around it and just understand that the rear signal or the rear arrow is always going to be weaker. But, you know, even maybe if we factor that aside, a lot of you guys, hopefully, you know, you have a better place to install a rear antenna in your car. Even if we ignore that one, there's still some weird issues where it will show, you know, the front and rear arrows simultaneously. I wish the detector would just, again, make the determination of is the signal in front or is it behind and light up just that arrow. If there's multiple signals, okay, you know, you can light up front and rear and that can be helpful, but if there's just one signal, I would much rather prefer light up only the front or only the rear, or maybe both arrows as like a side arrow as I'm passing the source or something, you know. And then the other thing, as far as the signals kind of coming and going as I'm driving, I've tried different settings and whatnot, different filtering options, different firmware versions. This seems to be kind of something weird going on with the detector. I'm sure Radenso can take a look at this and improve it and ultimately solve the issue, but it is currently something that I'm seeing. So that's how the arrows are here with the detector. Again, I definitely prefer having arrows to not. I've run it both ways, and I definitely find it helpful having the arrows, but this is not my favorite implementation of arrows that I've seen. So awesome. There we go. There's arrows. Let's move on to the next subject. Next, let's talk about the MRCD. So if you have the MRCD or MRCT, in Canada, it's in use in Alberta, I believe also in Quebec. Here in the US, it's in New York City, as well as we're now actually starting to see it in Maryland as well. Low-powered, difficult to detect radar. And the Radenso RCM is actually the best custom install detector detecting it because it's going to give you a good range against it, even against a really tough to detect radar gun like this. Plus, it's also got two other benefits. One, it does a really good job as far as filtering out false alerts. It's not perfect, but it does seem to do a better job as far as filtering out falses compared to like maybe the escort solutions like the Redline EX or Max CI International. And it also has a ramp up. So instead of just giving you a full tilt alert and announcing MRCD, it can actually progressively get weaker and then stronger as you get closer to the source. And it's the only radar detector that detects the MRCD that's able to do this, which is really nice, again, to help you locate the threat and know when you've passed it. Additionally, one other thing that I really like is the fact that you can turn off MRCD detection for the rear antenna. This was something I noticed with the Stinger that was kind of annoying, to where if you were running it with the arrows in Edmonton, Canada, for example, they actually shoot it facing the front, and so you're going to be picking up the MRCD before you get to the threat. Then once you pass the MRCD truck, it's going to be shooting in this direction to take a picture of the rear of your vehicle and the rear plate. Now the issue is because it's actually pointed at you like this, you're going to be picking it up way almost unnecessarily long from the rear with the rear antenna, and so it's nice to be able to maybe disable MRCD detection in the rear and have it only be running on the front. You can do that with the Radenso RCM. You can actually individually control all the different options, filtering settings, segmentation options, all that kind of stuff independently for the front and rear antennas. But I don't think other ones let you do that. The NetRadar DSP, you can do that as well, but not the Stinger. So that's a really cool feature of the Radenso I like as well. So overall, as far as an MRCD remote, this one seems to be the best one available. Next, taking a look at the audio alerts. This is something that I actually find a little bit annoying. You see, the K-band alerts are actually more attention-grabbing than the Ka-band alerts, which is really annoying. I mean, if it's going off to K-band, at least here it's generally a false, and I'm not really paying attention to it. But if it's a Ka-band alert, that really doesn't grab my attention as much, and I really think it should. I wish Radenso would kind of maybe switch the alerts. The K-band beep is a double beep, whereas a Ka-band beep is a single beep. This is backwards from how most detectors do it, where K-band is a single beep and Ka-band is a double beep, and so it's kind of weird for me, and I don't really like that. Now, I know that if Radenso was to switch it, it would be really confusing for everybody who's been using the detector for a while. I totally get that, so maybe they could give us an option the way the Unidens do or something. But that is something that I'd like to see them change. Now, something else that they actually are changing had to do with the fact that the K-band volume used to be much louder than the Ka-band volume. So what would happen was, like, if you wanted to hear the Ka-band volume, especially if you're driving on the highway or something, you'd have to turn the volume up. But then if you get a K-band false, it's going to be alerting much louder. And remember, it's also more attention grabbing. And so I would be like really quick to try to quiet down the detector. They have since been balancing the volume levels. So now K-band and Ka-band are much better balanced than they used to be, which is really nice. And so, like I said, there are some kind of quirks and annoyances, but Radenso is doing a good job as far as improving the detector over time, which is excellent. Moving on to the display. The display itself is going to alert you visually to any alerts that you see, and then it also has a bunch of buttons on the bottom for muting the detector, locking out signals, changing the display brightness, changing any detector settings, etc. The display brightness is an interesting one. I found that the bright display option does a good job during the daytime, but it's too bright at night, and so I'll go and press the brightness button to dim down the display. That does a much better job at night. However, when it comes to daytime, a lot of times it's very tough, if not impossible, to actually see the display. I've had situations where I thought the detector was actually turned off just because I couldn't see it, but it was on, which was great, but it kind of scared me a little bit, you know? I wish the detector had an ambient light sensor so it could automatically change the display brightness, but it is something that you're going to be reliant on manually to change the display brightness daytime or night. It also has things like a smart dark display option to where it can be visually off, and then only when it detects an alert will the display turn on, which is really nice, maybe at night if you want it to be extra dark, and then, you know, visually get your attention. I like that option. Or you can have the display be completely off, even when you're detecting a signal. So you do have a couple options, but yes, there is no ambient light sensor available in the detector. Something else I've noticed is that the display itself is kind of shiny, and so sometimes you'll be able to see the signal, but then other times, depending on the angle that you're looking at the detector's display, you may not be able to read the display at all. I've also experienced sometimes, and my passenger as well, if the sun is reflecting off the display, it can reflect into my face, and sometimes even into my eyes, which is kind of annoying. Fortunately, the display can actually be popped off. It's magnetically removable, so you can pop the display off if you like, and then put it back on afterwards. Now, this feature is actually designed for areas where maybe radar detectors or laser jammers are illegal, and if you want, you can just remove the display, and bam, the whole system instantly shuts down, which is really nice. There is an option in the menu to have the detector maybe stay on if you remove the display, which is how I run it, because I still want it to work if I'm removing the display, so it's not blinding me. But if you want it to shut down, you have that option as well, which is really cool. Now, I guess another annoyance that I found with the detector is I've had a couple times where I'm trying to mute the detector. Maybe it's a K-band false or a red light camera alert, and I want to mute the signal, but the detector will not mute. And then I go look at the detector, and it's actually power cycling, but the signal's still going off, and because it's power cycling, I can't press the mute button either, and so there's nothing I can do to quiet down the detector. This was kind of annoying, and it looks like what the issue is I'll demo it real quick just by pressing on the side of the detector. If I press on the side of the detector, you'll notice it kind of pops off the magnetic display real quick, and then comes right back on, and because it was disconnected for just a moment, the detector is power cycling. Now, I've had the same issue if I go and press the mute button without paying attention, that can pop off the display just a little bit. It's kind of tough to do. It rarely happens, but it has happened to me on 3 separate occasions. And so I guess some things to be aware of as far as this detector is if you're going to be installing it, I would recommend installing it somewhere where maybe reflecting off the sun is not going to be an issue, and also in a way where you're going to be pressing straight into the mute button, not at a very steep angle. It's not something that you would experience very often. Again, I don't experience it a lot, but it is something that I've noticed, so just a couple maybe tricks for you. Now, the display is smaller than Stinger's display, and Stinger also does a display and controller integrated in one unit, but the display is larger than Escort's display with the Max CI. But with the Escort, the controller is a separate controller. With the Radenso, it's actually integrated into the display itself. So a couple different ways of doing it, but those are some of the differences that I've noticed. Now, the detector also offers red light camera alerts and speed camera alerts, and it does a good job. You can even go in and choose how far away it alerts you, things like that. I had one the other day where it alerted to one red light camera, but then a couple blocks away there was another one that it missed. And so I just kind of jotted down the location, what directions it was monitoring in, all that kind of stuff, and I sent it over to Radenso, and they're going to be updating their database with that information, which is really cool. Overall, I find that it does a good job, and in order to update the red light camera database, basically you just download the latest update on your computer, put it on a USB drive, plug it into your detector, and it will update the red light camera database. The firmware is updated the same way. Again, you just go to their update page, type in your serial number. You'll get your firmware update for your detector, plug it in. The update process takes like a minute or two, and boom, you have all the new features, latest bug fixes, red light camera database, all that kind of stuff. And again, Radenso seems to do a really good job as far as regularly updating this detector, which is really nice. And so overall, as far as the big picture, I like the detector. Again, out of the 3 remotes that I have installed in my car, this is the one that I've been running day to day. It does still have some annoyances. I guess every detector does. But with this one, some of the annoyances, like I kind of have to work around them, like as far as the display stuff or the audio alerts. I wish they were a little bit different, or maybe it reflects into my eyes, things like that. And those can be kind of annoying day to day, you know? So it's little things like that that prevent me from like really loving the detector. I wish it had complete automatic GPS lockouts, but you got patent restrictions. I wish the mute and lockout button were on the same button. So, I mean, there are some changes that I wish they could make. Some of them they could do easily, some of them not so much, you know. But overall, as far as the big picture, I like the detector. The BSM filtering is great. I love the fact that it's got the GPS lockouts. I love some of the changes that they're making. I love the fact that it has arrows, even though I don't love the way the arrows are implemented. But yeah, overall, if you're looking for a good remote mount detector and you want something to integrate with the ALP, I think the Radenso RCM is a great option. So yeah, there you go. There's my overall take on the detector. It's kind of funny. I guess the last thing that I want to say is this has been one that's been a little bit difficult to find a good time to review because of the fact that there's been some pretty significant updates coming out. And so, you know, there would be maybe some issues like the lockouts weren't working or something, but they've since fixed that, or the audio stuff, but they've fixed that too. And it's been tough to find a good time to review it because of the fact that they continually change it, but that's a high quality problem to have. You know, if the product continually gets better and better, that's great, but it also does make it a little bit tougher for me to maybe, you know, find a good time to review it. And I'm sure within a couple months, some of the stuff that I talk about here is going to be different, and so even this review might wind up being out of date in some respects as time goes on. So pluses and minuses to that, I guess, but overall I'm really glad to see that Radenso continues to update the detector. So anyways, yeah, there you go. There's my take on the RCM. If you want one, I'll have a link down in the video description to where you can pick it up, and I'll also link you to RDF for all the Radenso discussion if you'd like to talk about the detector some more. So awesome. Thanks so much for watching this video. A big thanks to Radenso. I did receive this detector for free. I'm not being compensated in any way for that. If you do buy one, I do have affiliate links down there, and so that helps support my channel. If you buy one, I do make a percentage, so thank you very much. Doesn't cost you anything and allows me to continue doing this. But that actually is my take on it, good and bad. And yeah, awesome, cool. All right, well, I guess that's it for now. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.